Hello, everyone, and welcome to Claimed Children podcast. This podcast is produced by the Family for Every Child Foundation based in Moscow, Russia. This podcast is for those who help children and families and who keep hope alive even in difficult times. For those who believe that healing is possible and that many stories can have a better ending. Today we are honored to talk with Dr. Bruce Perry, psychiatrist, expert on brain development and childhood trauma, and author of the amazing book The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. Bruce's ideas have inspired professionals working with children all over the world, including adoptive parent communities here in Russia. In this episode, we talk about stories, how they help us understand trauma and support healing in families and systems. We talk about adoption, help, belonging, and the healing power of human connection. My name is Marina Ivanova. A Russian language version of this episode is also available. Thank you for listening, and please let us know in the comments what resonates with you. To learn more about the Family for Every Child Foundation, please visit our website, link in the description. Now, our conversation with Bruce. This podcast is usually in Russian, but today's episode is our first one in English, since, as I understand, Bruce, you don't speak Russian very well. So
Very poorly.
so we'll prepare translated version for our Russian listeners as well. And thank you so much, Bruce, for taking time and your time with us today.
Well, thank you, Marina. I appreciate the opportunity. And I know the work of your organization is very similar to the kinds of work that we've been doing. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
I have read your book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. It has influenced a lot our community of foster parents and psychologists here. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, man, there's so many details that are so much similar. So do you think trauma is universal, or how much culture shapes the way children experience and recover from it?
That's a great question. And as I think there are some things that I think are universal across the human species. We have similar genetics, we have similar stress response neurobiology. When faced with certain patterns of threat and challenge, we'll have very similar responses.
Right.
So, we've worked with people in, gosh, over 30 countries and many different kinds of cultures. Some are more traditionally indigenous, some are Western urban, some are Eastern urban, some are very permeated with religious beliefs, and they have different ways of child rearing than most of us might be familiar. And we see trauma you know, expressed in all of these populations in different ways. The thing that the second part of that question, though, I think is really important, and I think what we're learning, and I think what probably lots of other people already know, is that culture can have certain factors which either make it more likely that you're going to struggle with, you know, challenges and adversity, or they can make it less likely.
Like what?
And and so here's kind of what we're seeing. And I think it will make sense to most people when they think about it. But if you are in a economically stable environment, and you have good relationships within your family, and there's a network in your community of people that you feel connected to, and you participate in whatever your culture's kind of group activities are, whether it's organized around religion or sport or you know neighborhood activities of different sorts. If you have that kind of cultural glue, you're better capable of tolerating the stressors that are inevitable in life. The loss of a loved one, someone gets a disease and dies, a car accident kills a child. Those things are traumatic. But if you are connected to people, if you have a sense, if people are around you and are able to be present and supportive, and it makes it so much easier to kind of get through those experiences in a way where yes, it was a traumatic event, but no, I'm not carrying forward trauma related problems for the rest of my life. I get sad when I think about the loss of my child, but it didn't destroy my life, for example. And and so I think that one of the things we see at least in the United States is that the more we are separate from each other, the more we create an environment where we're spending a lot of time on screens. We're not connected. We move away from our families. We're new to the neighborhood. There's a lot of mobility. Everybody has their own room in their own house. And so the amount of relational, if you will, fragmentation that kind of goes with modern Western life that's screen focused, and the ratio of, in classrooms is one teacher and 25 kids, we're creating kind of an environment that's vulnerable, I think, to the kind of the social cultural mechanisms that we've evolved as a species to deal with stress and trauma.
Still in Russia, we have lots of orphanages, and sometimes what I see that if a child loses parents, he will be put in an institution, sometimes transferred a few times, sometimes it will be in a different city. So like he might be like so confused, and yeah, his connections will be so fragile.
And we see the same thing in the US. I mean, we don't have as many kids in sort of institutional settings.
Right.
We do have some, but if you look at our foster care system, we have kids that will move 16, 17, 18 times. That's just not, they can't get connected to a group of classmates. They can't really join a sports team. They can't really become part of the theater group. All of the things that kind of create these relational connections that get fragmented by the well-intended, but I think developmentally uninformed practices and policies of our foster care system.
Right.
And we're trying, there are people that are trying to change that, but systems are very resistant to change. Even in the face of, evidence that what they're doing is maybe not the best, it takes a long time to get them to change. So that's again, that's a big part of our work, is trying to help educate people about these things so that some of that change can start to take place.
And I thought that you have chosen an interesting way to inform people, like in your book, that you decided to use stories. That was so
That's right.
unusual when I first was reading the book. So it's not that you only told us all your research and all your ideas about brain development and trauma, but you started with stories, and those stories stick with me, and I know with many readers so much. So my question was like, how were you choosing these stories? Because on one hand, I think it's like we need to tell the truth, see how it might work and influence kids. But on the other hand, we might tell so many scary stories that people will say like, oh,
Exactly.
oh. So how were you choosing your stories?
As you were saying this, you probably saw me start to smile. And this because you work in the same field that I do. We have a whole catalog of just horrible, heartbreaking stories, right? And since we see these more often than everybody else, sometimes we lose perspective, uh, you know, about what other people don't get exposed to. So when I first started writing this book, a couple of the stories I wrote down, the editors are like, "Oh my God, like we can't publish this."
They're
And I'm like,
horrible. Yeah, some of the
it,
stories are just horrible.
"Yeah," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that is kind of intense." So part of what happened, and it's taken a while to evolve the ability to do this, is that you want people to understand it without driving them away. As you pointed out earlier, that it can just be so overwhelming that people go, "Oh my, I can't read this. It's like too intense." And then you don't have the opportunity to teach them. Over time, with help from other people who kind of look at it and go, that was intense, but that's okay. And then some are like, "Oh no, someday what I want to do is write the book of the Ono stories, just
Mm.
because, it's like you think that's bad. When do you hear this one?
Right. Do you want to hear a real scary story?
Yeah. So I'm glad that you pointed that out because I mentioned earlier that systems take a long time to change. And in the US, one of the things that sort of the academic world is always talking about evidence. We want
Right.
evidence-based this, evidence-based that. Where's the data? And many, many years ago, I was invited to a very high-profile select conference where there were a lot of like famous people there, and the intention of the organizers, which included several Hollywood celebrities, was to try to engage the major policy making people and the major entertainment and information people in the US, like head of Time Magazine, Newsweek, the heads of these big foundations that give money, um, wanted to teach them about early childhood and brain development and why it was important. And I was very young. And there were all these other, there were, I was, first of all, I had no idea why they asked me because I'm like, really? I mean, I'm pretty junior. They had like people that were Nobel laureates and stuff, and I'm like, oh, really? This was early, early in my career, and I watched these guys get up, incredible scientists, did incredible work, and they were talking to non-scientists, and they would put up columns of data and asterisks that showed significance at the level of 0.01, and the audience just went, and so I realized what you have here is really important, but you're not communicating it in a way that really reaches anybody. So by the time it came to my turn, I decided that I was just going to try to talk to them like I was telling like a fifth grade kid about what I do for a living. And I told some stories. And they sat up and they listened and they're like, oh, wow. And then I would show them like very simplified graph, like this is bad and this is good. And they're like, oh yeah, big bar graph, little bar graph. And it was like, yeah, they like pictures. So so I would tell stories and I'd show pictures, and that that resulted in them getting very excited about the topic area and being very interested in it and trying to really disseminate this important information about how critical early childhood is. And it was a really good lesson for me that you might have all of the knowledge in the world. You might have the secret of life, right? But if you don't communicate it properly, it just sticks with you. It will not get to other people. And I think, like you said, when you hear a good story and it has the fact you're trying to communicate is contextual, or it has some emotional connection to the listener or or the reader, then it sticks. And so I've used stories a lot to try to teach some of these concepts.
I think we have lots of like same experience as we train people who want to become adoptive parents. So often they come to us because, well, we want to become parents. We want to find a very small kid just to become parents for him or her. We just want to share our love. And then when we start to explain them how brain works and how damaged can be kids who went through institutional care or through like family in crisis, they often being surprised, and we also trying to find this like balance. We don't want to scare you too much,
Exactly.
and we
Yeah.
don't want you to think it's all like, oh, you just love each other and life will be perfect and everything will be okay. And I was thinking how to like do our conversation. What if I offer you few stories about foster parents and what they come with, like
Wonderful.
very short,
Yeah,
and like
perfect.
kind of what would be your ideas on this. Like,
Great.
so let's say there is a foster mom named Tatiana, very famous Russian name. And
That's
so
our job.
she comes to us for help. She is very disappointed that her son, who is 8 years old, he struggles at school. He lives with her for 5 years. She thinks he's okay, and yet when she tells him do your homework, she or he doesn't want to do it, and they often have conflicts about that. And she doesn't
Yeah.
understand what's wrong. So,
Yeah.
what are your ideas?
Well, you're pointing out a very common scenario, as you mentioned at the outset. And we tend to start all of our clinical encounters by asking the person, whether it's the parent or whether it's an older client. We want to know their story, like how did you get here? It's in the beginning, part of what you have to do is sort of reassure the parent that, listen, we're going to get to the issue around Billy's and his homework, but let me back up a little bit. How did you end up adopting him, and where are you from, and what's your family like? And we do this for a couple of reasons. One is that as people begin to talk about their own origins and their own history, they're going back to something that's very familiar to them, and they get less dysregulated. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about and writing about is the fact that when people feel distressed or overwhelmed, they shut down parts of the brain that are involved in learning new things. And that's kind of part of our job is to help them learn new things. So unless we can make them feel safe enough and regulated enough to hear what we're saying, they might as well not be here. So we back them up, we try to calm them down, we make them feel safe and reassure them that, listen, these are addressable issues. You know, we can figure it out. We'll figure it out together. Back them up. We learn about their history. And along the way, when we hear about their history, whenever we find something that is a contextual opportunity to teach something without preaching, and usually this happens, usually somebody will mention something and you'll have an opportunity to talk about how hard it is to make transitions, right? Man, that must have been tough for you when you went off to school or when your dad left your mom or whatever it is. You begin to help them connect with the fact that, yeah, when people are feeling distressed, they can't think as clearly and they get more tired and ultimately by the time you get to Billy and you back up and go, let's talk about Billy. Where'd Billy come from? And they begin to have these little light bulbs go off and go, oh yeah, that was difficult for him, and this is difficult for him, and this is a new classroom, and he's never had mastery in this before, and he actually might be chronologically older than he is developmentally capable, right? So school is a huge challenge for him. It's all about trying to help people learn a little bit more about how they work and about how the child works. And again, we kind of use stories, but we use their story. What's your story? Like, what's your story? Where'd you come from? And they'll bring something and go, that must have been hard. And as soon as you can they feel seen, but then you can bring in a concept like, yeah, when people have those kinds of transitions, it really can influence, the part of your brain that's involved in thinking. And they a lot of times a parent will go, yeah, I couldn't, I had a really hard time with my own schoolwork and I took a semester off. And I go, oh, so you kind of you squirrel away these little things that later on you can say, remember when you took that semester off? That's kind of what Billy's experiencing like every day when he goes into that classroom. He has to work so hard to kind of learn these concepts that other kids are picking up with two or three or four repetitions. And that's why at the end of the day, when he comes home all tired and you say, do you have any homework? He blows up. He's just had, that he needs to get regulated before he can actually even hear what you're saying. And so we do a lot of psychoeducation.
So psychoeducation, but also on the other hand, I think on your story, empathy of a parent is very important because you are saying like
Exactly.
remember yourself. But what if
Yeah.
parent is not very good, not very good contact with empathy?
That's tough. that is tough. I mean, that's one of the hardest groups that we work with who are in that kind of adoptive foster community are folks who are using that experience to kind of fill some unmet need. Now, it isn't always the case, but there
Right.
are some, it's not just adoptive and foster parents, there's some regular
It's also
biological parents.
any
Right.
any people who help. So often people who
Exactly.
help, they are there with their hard child's experience as well.
Exactly. And they get something out of being needed. They kind of sometimes even get angry if they don't get sort of this reciprocal love back. I did this for you and I did this for you. And if it wasn't for me, you'd be here. If they have attachment issues themselves, it can really set up a really challenging relationship with the child. Not always, but we tend to be able to try to bring in another adult. We don't expect that in our interaction with somebody, we're going to build empathic capabilities. We kind of go, all right, well, they're going to be good at this. So who can we find that's going to be a little bit softer, who will meet some of those needs for the child and take that burden off of this parent? And maybe it's sometimes it might be a grandma or grandpa.
In your book, there's a lady called Mrs. P.
Yeah, Mama P. Yeah,
Mama P, Mama P.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I think that's my favorite character in the book when I think back about the book. And yes, often I think I wish sometimes for some our parents, especially for parents who get the kid and it's their first kid, I wish they can be around with somebody like Mama P, but just feel it, like be around people like this.
I'm with you. We've actually tried to get some of the places we work with to consider kind of you can frame it as mentorship or something else, but if you have somebody there who's just sort of experienced and compassionate while you're learning how to do some of these things, it just makes it a lot easier. We've been able a few times to be able to get a co-fostering situation where both the parent and the child come into a home setting and get what they need. Neither one of them are, they're not pathologized. It's not punitive. It tries to be supportive. And, the modeling and the support that the parent gets, then something that they can apply with their own child. And they develop a sense of competence. It's just a really nice way to do it. But again, in the US, they make these weird economic decisions, right? And they do it everywhere. All the places we work with, whether it's Canada, Australia, countries in Western Europe, they always kind of default to, oh, we're only going to have one caseworker per, one teacher per 30 kids, one. And it's like, if you actually had team casework, it would go a lot better. If you did things as a group, you'd probably be a little bit more effective. But systems take a long time to change.
Yeah, I think in this way, for many families that I was watching, churches communities help. So
Exactly.
sometimes when they're like older people, other
Yeah.
moms, they have groups, there's somebody who would take care of them. Sometimes this is one of the ways when people can get it and get it for free.
Yeah, and Marina, that's such an important point because if you remember when I was talking about earlier about sort of the power of culture
Right.
so if you are connected to either a really active community group, whether it's faith-based or whether you somehow get folded into like the soccer, the child might have some like skill, whether it's the music.
Can
And
be.
if you can get into that kind of thing, you're absolutely right that when you distribute some of the caregiving burden in that group, it just makes it so much easier for the primary parenting person. And it also is just a much richer experience for the child to have lots of people give them positive experiences.
So then there's another mom who comes to your office. Let's say her name is Natalia. Uh,
Natalia, that's another good.
and so she comes and she tells the story that she has an adoptive daughter and she's 5 and the girl was stealing candies at the supermarket.
Mm,
And so she right away remembers the story of her biological mom who was put to prison because of a crime and stealing things. And so she would say, see, these are the genes.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
how biology work. What can we do? So all these like books and love and care that you keep talking about, they don't work. See, so what will be your thoughts on this?
Well, again, we rely a lot on psychoeducation. We go, all right, well, let's talk about how genes work.
Hmm.
And we would talk about that a little bit, even before we talked about the candy stealing behavior. Now, just to be in full disclosure, I actually stole candy when I was a little kid.
Me too.
And I remember when my dad found out, he's like, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "I got it at, this little corner grocery store that we went to." And he said, "Did you buy that?" And I said, "Yes." "Where'd you get the money?" And I could, and he knew right away. And he said, "All right." He took me by the ear, marched me down, and I had to give it back and apologize, and then had to work there cleaning up for a week. And but it was a good, it was a good little lesson. But the I didn't turn into a big sociopath, right? Um, anyway, so we talk a little bit about we this whole issue about where behavior comes from is a really powerful thing. And, we see this with biological parents too. One of the things we run into all the time is that there will be, let's say that there's a single parent, and then the dad, she had a relationship with a man, and the man left. And then she's enraged at the man, doesn't like the man. And the little child starts to grow up. And as soon as they demonstrate any attribute that in any way reminds them of that, they go, "See, you're just like your
Just like your
father."
father.
And and what happens is that because of the way the brain works, it's kind of a prediction machine. So your brain, her brain, will then be looking for anything that reaffirms that belief. And eight, nine, 10 things that are not like her partner, they kind of ignore. And then the one thing, then they'll hone in on it. And what happens is, because of the way human interactions are, is that if your primary caregiver has this expectation that you will act a certain way and keeps pointing it out, ultimately you begin to act that way. And it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's very powerful. And so this is we try as early as we can to start to break some of those false internal representations, that just because this is an adopted child and you heard that the father was a drug abuser and was in prison, that does not mean that this child is going to become like that. But you're absolutely right. There are so many parents that they'll see one little thing, and then they'll hone in, and then they kind of go, okay, it's just genetically inevitable that they're going to be a little sociopath. Again, this is a very challenging situation, because in order for them to change their mind, they need to trust you. And so if you could immediately confront them and go, "No, that's not the way it works," they don't believe you. They just leave your office politely, and then they just go on believing what they believe.
Right.
So this is a process where you have to gradually create a relationship, and then provide opportunities for them to begin to see the child a little bit differently. And in our experience, what we find is that you're much more successful avoiding their direct belief by pointing out how they're, oh, see, they're not like their dad. See, beginning to point out things that the child is doing that are good, and give, literally start to change unconsciously the internal template that they've created for what this kid is like. Because when people really hate having their primary beliefs challenged, it scares your brain. So your brain really, your brain does not like to be wrong. There's a part of our brain that is not very smart, that basically is hanging on tight to the worldview that you've created. And so it doesn't believe in logic, just it doesn't get changed very easily. But the way it gets changed is a little bit like, a, if you envision a scale, that if you've created a worldview that Billy's bad and genetically flawed, what you need to do is begin to have tiny little experiences you could point out where that was kind of nice. That was kind of nice. That's a good skill. He's good at that. And over time it just begins to shift. Because if you go directly at it and say, no, 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 I'm going to take stuff off of this scale and put it over here, that primitive part of your brain goes, I'm holding on to that even harder, even tighter. This
Right.
is something who anybody who's ever parented a an adolescent who begins forming a romantic relationship with somebody that you go, oh my God. The last thing you want to do is point out how they're not so great, right? The more you talk about how they don't have a job, they don't have a car, what are they going to do? I mean, the more I love him, it's us against the world. So it's that same strategy. You have to like, if you go right at it, you're just further encrusting their belief about how wonderful that person is. So I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think I can relate to these stories like so well. And I guess for us also one of the like kind of exercise that we use, sometimes we ask parents to draw like a tree of their family as wide as they can, like whoever they remember, like parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, like uncle and aunts, and then ask them, parents, to point dots if there were anybody who did a crime, anybody who had
Uh,
psychiatric disease, anybody who was not taking care of their children, and so like they're usually like who was alcoholics, and usually like everybody would have at least few family members
that's a
who,
great idea. That's great.
who
I love that.
yeah, who did that, and
I'm
then
gonna
see,
steal that.
yeah, please do, please do.
I'll give you credit though. I think
Uh,
it's a great idea. Oh, that's so great because it's kind of like putting a mirror up to the can say like yeah right that it's not inevitable just because so and so was that way. You're not that way,
mm.
right?
Yeah, and usually when we do this, many, yeah, parents would get like compassion and kind of understand, yeah, like let's say my uncle was this way, but it doesn't mean that my entire family genes are like bad or something like that. So usually it's
Yeah,
quite eye-opening. Hmm.
that's a great idea. I love that idea.
Okay, then there is another mother who is coming to your office, and her name is Olga. And
Olga,
Olga,
is that another Russian? Oh, that's kind of
and
funny.
so, and Olga says that her and her husband has adopted a newborn baby 10 years ago. And everything is all right, but they keep it in secret. Family members know, their doctor, of course, know, but the child doesn't know.
Doesn't know.
And they have read an article that it is important to tell the kids that they were adopted. And so they're asking, should we? Because the child never asked. And we kind of have this story, this legend. When you start informing Olga, what do you think is crucial about understanding should and how and when we should talk to kids about bad stuff that happened to them? How significant is the truth and conversations about that?
That first of all, that's again not an uncommon issue, right? I mean, it does happen quite a bit.
Very common.
And I'm just gonna be honest, I don't have a perfect answer to this. I think some of it depends upon uh, the way in which the parents can convey the information. And of course, I think as there's developmental components, right? If you sort of kept stuff secret that long, then that's kind of a different trajectory than if the child has some early developmental awareness about their two families and you live with this family and mom and dad. There's ways that different families kind of evolve the child's story. I think you want to intervene early enough that the child doesn't create kind of this very firm inner understanding of their own story, where they came from, because changing that can be pretty jolting. And I've talked with a number of people who have been adopted, particularly inter-country adoptions,
Hmm.
or you come from a completely different culture, interracial adoptions where a white family adopts a black child, or a white family, Caucasian family in the West adopts an Asian child from a completely different culture. And almost invariably, when I talk to the older adopted person, they have a whole range of emotions about the way they were told and kind of the disruption of their own internal narrative about who they are. And some of them end up kind of, trying to figure out who they are, what their culture is really like, what they should have lived like. And it's a complicated set of challenges. But in general, I think the truth is a powerful thing. And the more comfortable the parents are with being honest and open about stuff, I think the more the child can absorb and create an accurate sense of where they've come from and who they are. But if they haven't talked to the child until they're 10, and that child kind of, there's some sort of fantasy narrative, I think by the time you're 10, you can understand a lot of stuff. And I would just sit down and say, listen, we have to talk about something. And we want you to know that you were adopted, and this is what we know about that family, which may or may not be anything. And that we were so lucky to get you when you were a month or 2 months or whatever it was. It was one of the happiest days of, just do whatever, tell the story in an accurate way. And then at some point, you have to also say that even though we just say we didn't know exactly how to handle this for you. And so we just let the inertia of that story go forward. But it's important that you know the truth. And we can talk about it again and again and again and again, because you're going to have lots of thoughts and ideas and feelings that come up about it. But we just want you to know that we're able to talk about it. We want to talk about it. You are on a family pathway that thousands of other kids have been on, and it's different, and it makes you have certain opportunities for growth, but it also has certain things that are going to be hard for you, and we know that. So, but we'll help you get through it. That's kind of what I do. Just be straightforward, tell the story, and kind of correct the developmental trajectory before it gets so encrusted. I mean, you don't want to have somebody when they're 17 to kind of accidentally find out that, like, what, what? I
Yeah,
mean, they'll
unfortunately,
have, yeah,
we have heard so many stories when adults find out that they were adopted at the funerals of their uh, foster parents. So for some reason, when a parent dies, and let's say like all the family get together, somebody starts telling stories, and like we have heard the stories like few times that not only a person loses a parent at this moment.
I've worked with a number of folks who were raised by, like, they were raised as by their grandparents, but they thought they were parents.
Right, yeah, we have these stories as well.
And when they find out, they're like, what the hell? I thought that was my sister, but that was my mom. And you're like, it can cause some significant challenges. So that's why I think earlier is better than,
It's very rarely that like parents were uneducated, that they didn't know that they need to tell. Like once we have met a family, they said that one of the psychologists told them it's better not to tell your kid that he was adopted, like hurt. For some reason, they got this bad advice, and so they followed it. As soon as
yeah,
they were told, okay, no, 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 stop it, do it this way, they're like, okay, fine, we do it. But quite often, what we see is that uh, there is some sort of pain in parents'
mm,
life and soul that they cannot speak about it for
right,
some reason because they couldn't have their own children,
exactly.
because they had some, I don't know, fear of people of that race, I don't know, whatever, for some reason, and they become silent. And often they need help themselves before they start talking to
Absolutely.
kids.
And that's such an important point, because the way they carry that and the way they communicate that is something that will be perceived by the child. And so if there is shame about it, if that will be confusing to the child. You're telling me that you love me and you adopted me, but clearly I can feel that this is embarrassing for you. And they get a confused message. And that's why I think your point about working with the parent and making sure that they feel comfortable with what and how they talk about it and what they share in the process is really important. And this is why, again, you guys may do it differently than us. We kind of do it very much on a case by case basis, depending upon, in general, the rule is the earlier you feel comfortable being open about it, the easier it will be for this child to carry it forward, right?
Mhm.
But some, like you said, some families just can't. They have a really hard time with that. The other thing that you brought up that's so very true, and there's so many people giving bad advice about some of this stuff. It's just shocking almost. In our field, the field of trauma, if you do work in this field, I think more than any other area of kind of mental health and sort of medical work, medical practice, there's more wiggle room for kind of weird, marginal, fringe like stuff that people are vulnerable to, and of course, there's always people that will declare their technique is, 100% of the people that use my super special technique, and families are very vulnerable to that kind of thing.
All right, and there's one more mom,
All right.
Ekaterina. So
Ekaterina.
Ekaterina
Ekaterina.
is she has a adopted boy, let's say Serежа. And Serежa is 10 and his behavior is horrible lately at school and with his siblings. And so she's very tired and very frustrated and she says she wants to go to a psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist tell her exactly what his diagnosis is. So she really wants to know it. And so as we talk, how important is for her to know this diagnosis? Will it actually help her? Or will it be something that she will use like an excuse? See, like we can't do nothing. It's because he is this way.
It's very tough for a lot of parents to really acknowledge easily that whenever there's a challenge with their child, that there's a component to it that involves the parents. It's not about fault, that behavior in the home and then outside of the home they're both intimately related to the dynamic interaction between the child and the parenting group. Because the parent is an adult, it's usually the one of the easier and logical ways to actually get access to that dyadic interaction, right? Sometimes kids are so impulsive, so reactive, so regressed. It's easier to start with the change in the parent as opposed to the change in the child. However, there's a tendency of the adults to want to say there's something wrong with Billy and I want the right pill and the right diagnosis, and I don't believe that it has anything to do with the way I set boundaries or the way I do discipline or the way I, whatever, the way I'm sort of having unrealistic developmental expectations of this kid who may be chronologically 10 but socially 4. So I think that, again, one of the hardest parts of our work, and I suspect your work as well, is creating a working relationship with the parent where they feel valued and respected and they're not shamed and they're not blamed. And when that happens, then you can actually be more effective at sharing what your thoughts are about things that may be helpful. But in the beginning, many, many parents really want to externalize a problem. They want it to be a diagnostic issue with the child, and we just need to find the right drug and get the right behavioral plan in school and the right points and level system. And once we do that, then it'll be taken care of. But it's very rare, particularly in the foster adopt population, that that kind of intervention is going to be very effective. And these kids might meet diagnostic criteria for something, but if you have trauma related changes in the way you develop, you're not going to have a normal response to most psychiatric medications. You
Mm.
might fit the criterion, but the normal evidence-based approach for that disorder will be relatively ineffective if it's a manifestation of trauma as opposed to if it's traditional ADHD, for example. So this is why, again, we try to do a lot of taking history, forming relationships, and finding over time what are the focal points that we can hone in on that will change kind of this complex dynamic. Is there some niche where this child can actually feel like he's competent? And is there some relationship in the neighborhood, in the school, at home, where the child isn't continually having his flaws pointed out? And once we kind of find a positive thing where the child can succeed, then we kind of have the beginning of this process that can influence the bigger system. But
Right.
that's a big part of what we do is that we actually as a working group don't give diagnostic labels. We create a description of their different areas of functioning. And we may say, yeah, wow, you have the fine motor control of a 10-year-old and you're 10. That's great. You have the social skills of a 6-year-old and you're 10. That's like, it's not horrible, but we need to give you social development opportunities that would be appropriate for a 6-year-old. So you could begin to build social skills so that in 3 or 4 months, you will act like a 7-year-old. And then in another 6 months, if we keep matching you where you are, you'll be an 8-year-old. And then you'll be 11. So you'll only be 3 years behind. And if we keep doing that, by the time you're 12, you'll be a 10-year-old. And if we keep doing it, by the time you're 13, you'll be a 12-year-old and you'll be caught up. But we need to meet you where you are developmentally. And if we do that and we give you these opportunities for growth, you're going to make progress.
So do you
Yeah.
talk to kids this way? This is something
Yeah,
you would
absolutely.
explain to kids like
Yeah,
10,
and that's why
11?
I don't really talk about it in these books too much, but we literally create like this an image of the way their brain appears to be organized, and it's color coded. And we talk with them. We go, look at this. See, this is what a normal brain looks like if you are, and you've got a couple places here that are kind of red. And they go, yeah, I'm not good at that. I don't like that. And I said, that's okay. That can get better. What do you think is a kind of a fine motor activity that you like to do? Do you like to draw? Do you like to use clay? What do you like to do? Well, let's figure out how to do that with sufficient repetition and in a pattern that fits your week where you're going to get enough repetitions to build skill there. And let's do the same thing with, let's say you're not good at emotional regulation. Like, that's okay. The kids that are 3-year-olds actually ultimately get to the point where they can act like 10-year-olds. Now, it usually takes 7 years and 7 years of experience, but we can jumpstart that part of the brain and we can do things that will help you catch up faster. And here's the array of things that might work. Did anything in here seem like you'd like to do it? And almost always when you do this collaborative treatment planning process with the kids, they love it. And they'll come back and they'll go, you know what, that little red square about social, that needs to be yellow now because I had, some kid came up to me in the hallway and called me a name, and I would normally have hit him, but this time I just called him a name back. And so I'm going like, progress. I got in trouble for it. That's all right. But hey, it's better than hitting him. And so you work with these kids and with their families about all of this stuff. And you use this map kind of as a guideline for how to sequence and select activities that are likely going to influence those parts of the brain. So
Yeah, that's a great idea. I think this will be the one idea that I steal from you this time during this
steal away,
conversation.
steal away.
As we go to the end of the conversation, there were lots of times when I was telling people to read your book. So we have a bunch of them in our office, and sometimes when parents come and I see it would be appropriate for them to get that type of information, I would give them the book. And so often they will say, "Oh, what a scary name!" Like I was like, "No, no," I was like, "No, no, no!" Like this book gives lots of hope. I guess that's the main
Good.
feeling that I get from your book is hope, and like so it's really light to me. So you have seen lots of very dramatic and sad stories. What helps you to continue to have hope and joy and continue to do what you do and not just give up and say like I'm done with that. It's too much. Life is too tragic.
Well, Marina, I think what the main thing is that I'm old enough that I've seen progress. So both in the systemic challenges we have, we're getting better. Our systems are a little bit better. There's more awareness about these things. Little by little, there are policy changes that are good. But more than anything, I see people get better. I see people that really are doing incredible things after having really hard starts. People who were adopted, who struggled with social skills and learning problems, who kind of find their way, find a niche, and they end up becoming compassionate, contributing members of society. And that gives me a lot of hope. I mean, I do believe that we can continue to make things better. And And what you guys do is part of it, right? I mean, but I got an email the other day from somebody who I just talked to in 2018. That's one talk, one brief conversation. And they wrote me a note about how much it was influential in the way they chose to do things. And that, to your point about hope, that our conversation gave them hope that their life would not always be miserable. And now they're out, they went to college, and now they're out serving people as someone who does mental health work with people who are struggling with schizophrenia. And I just thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So that's what gives me hope and kind of keeps me in the game.
Thank you
Cool.
very much, Bruce, for this
My pleasure.
conversation. It was my pleasure as well. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you, Maria. Keep up the good work.
This was Dr. Bruce Perry. Please let us know in the comments what ideas stayed with you after listening. If you are a Russian-speaking adoptive or foster parent and you need support, please reach out to us in Family for Every Child Foundation. You can join our support groups or sign up for free sessions with one of our psychologists. If you are a Russian-speaking specialist who work with children, adoptive families or foster parents, please visit our website to learn more about our programs and professional groups. You will also find many materials in Russian that we have created to help you in your work. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to Anna Ragulina for her work on producing this episode. Every child has the right to grow up in a family. We work to make sure that neither children nor we carry the feeling of being orphaned. My name is Marina Ivanova. This is Family for Every Child Foundation. Thank you and see you next time.